Hello and welcome to Humanism Now, the podcast from the Central London Humanists. I'm your host, James. This week, why illegal faith schools deny the right to science, why science literacy is so important to society, and lessons in setting up a humanist students group with our guest, Ojas Singh Bhanot, founder of the London School of Economics Students' Union's Humanists Open Minds group. To discuss all that and more, I'm delighted to be joined by two of our regular panellists here, Nicole from Leicester Humanists and Mark, my colleague at Central London Humanists. So our icebreaker question this week is, what national holiday would you like to introduce if you could? Nicole, great to have you back on the show. And what national holiday would you introduce?
Hello, lovely to be here as always. So I would like to introduce something like, I don't know what we'd call it, but basically a secular Yom Kippur. So I'm sure some of our listeners are aware, but Yom Kippur is a Jewish holiday that is, well, obviously it's very religious. A lot of it's about repentance of sin and this sort of thing. But in terms of a secular way of looking at it, it's looking over the way you've spent your year and looking over mistakes you might have made, people you might have wronged, people you might have hurt, and reaching out to them, or even if it's just people that you've kind of lost touch with and things like that. So I think that having a day of space where, and if everybody's doing that, then you'll have a great day of hearing from people and contacting people. This is an idea that Alain de Botton talks about in Religion for Atheists, which is a great book, and I'd recommend it. But I think that having that space to just kind of think about what we've done, how we've spent our time, and those that mean things to us. And because I think a lot of the things where it's religious is framed as sin. Of course, we don't believe in that, but there's a much more humanist angle we can take on that.
I think that's a great idea. The only trouble is I think I'd need far more than one day each year to right from my wrongs. But I think that's something we can definitely learn from. Mark, good to see you again, and thanks for coming. And what day would you introduce?
Thank you, James. Yeah, really lovely to be here. And I really like the idea of that day for reflection and repentance. And I suspect there'll be a lot of apology phone calls made throughout the day, a lot of them by me. I like the idea of having some sort of celebration of democracy and democratic values, because I feel our democratic process is quite divisive. I don't know if anyone's picked up on that. It can get quite nasty and factional, and so I think something that sort of celebrates what actually holds us together, and what's good about democracy and what we all agree on would be something really positive. And it could I think democracy feels a little bit under threat, so it'd be nice to have something that just sort of pointed out the positives and made us all aware of why it's so important.
Yeah, great idea to turn what's currently a negative into a positive, another day of reflection as well. I think for me, I was thinking about this one. It's Earth Day next month, 22nd of April, and it tends to come and go without much fanfare. But I think that could be one that could easily be turned into perhaps an international holiday, and actually spend a day reconnecting with the planet and giving thanks to the Earth. So maybe that's something we could take off as a day in the future. Well, thank you both for that. And again, great to have you with us for this week's show. Now, earlier this month, Humanist UK were invited to speak at the 55th session of the UN Human Rights Council. They raised a couple of interesting topics, which they published articles on the website, and we wanted to reflect a little bit this week. The first was around the role of illegal faith schools and the impact that they have, particularly on science education. So I guess first, just to sort of reflect on the article, and draw out this topic a little bit more. Nicole, maybe if I come to you first, what impact do illegal schools have on children's right to comprehensive education? Why is this an important topic for humanists?
Yeah, I think it should be a pertinent topic for everybody, but particularly for humanists. It's the way that these children's education is being set up is an incredibly poor start to their life. The biggest thing that struck me in that article was the children who are born here and can't speak English. And it shows how badly the education system is failing them, that they are, born and bred in a country where English is the main language and they can't speak it. Like, even that alone is going to set them up for, they have to now learn another language to be able to communicate with most people in the country they are from. And then along with everything else, education is so fundamental, especially for younger children, when it's the basics of reading and writing, and just how to be a person and how to live. And I think it kind of feeds into a wider issue that we've got about education in this country. So I'm sure that we've all memories of school days when you had those terrible teachers who just taught you something by rote, especially with things like history. They'd just be like, here are all the dates that things happened. You have to learn them. And in my mind, that's not teaching, that's not education. Because what have you learned? Oh, you learned that this war started on this date and this general was called this. And okay, those are important things to know. But what true understanding and true education should be about is critical thinking, how to reason, how to research something that you're interested in yourself, how to assess evidence. Is this good evidence? What's wrong with it? What is bias? And that's something that, at least when I was at school, certain teachers were quite good at, some were terrible at, and let alone looking at what these children who are forced to just read scripture and dogma all day, they're not even getting a chance to even learn about things that happen in history, even as a light. They're just learning pure scripture. And I assume, it doesn't say, but I can imagine that something that's teaching pure scripture all the time, they're not teaching how to be critical or how to think for yourself or how to assess something. And they're just missing out on a wide variety of excitement. And it's such a narrow start in life. Like, if you then have to learn how to do maths, how could you ever become, obviously the thing that kids all want to be is like an astronaut. How could you even start thinking about that if you didn't learn any maths at school?
Some people listening to this might think this is, this might be a fairly small issue. But Mark, how big a issue is this, particularly in the UK, as we're talking about?
So looking at the Humanist UK response, as Nicole was talking about, I mean, they identify 6,000 children, but I think, rereading, that's just London, and that's 6,000 boys who are missing from the this educational role. So that seems like quite a significant number, and you also tend to think that that's probably an underestimate, because there may well be other people who slip through the net. So nationally, it could be quite large. It's probably concentrated in urban areas, I'm guessing, but obviously there are plenty of other cities, large cities, which could well be affected by this. So, and I think it is an issue. I mean, it's an issue if there's one child who's missing out on their getting a proper education. But I think when you have that sort of number of people being denied access to what we could call a secular education, a broad-ranging, understanding of a number of sort of established subjects, the liberal arts, etc., then that could have quite an impact on society, as well as the impact it has on the individuals and their future prospects. But so it seems like quite a significant sort of multi-level problem, just both for the individuals affected and also for wider society, because obviously we're looking at, just looking in economic terms, we have a significant, labour shortages and skills shortages, and if thousands of people every year are receiving an education which basically doesn't prepare them for life in the workforce, just to looking at that in that narrow way, then that's a significant problem.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds like from what you've both contributed there, that we need to consider this as an issue not just in terms of the rights of the individual child and their access to education, but also its impact on wider society as well. And I just wondered, as part of society, should we be concerned with the balancing of religious freedoms with the imperative of a child being provided with specifically a science-based, critical thinking-based education? Nicole, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think there's a concern around balance there?
Yeah, I think in theory it shouldn't be difficult, because I think a lot of religious people in this country, a lot of the religious people I've met, they kind of see religion as its own thing, as kind of separate to scientific education. And I've met a lot of, I'd say the majority of religious people I've met believe in things like evolution and the Big Bang Theory. Those are scientific concepts, and some people like us might say that clashes with a religious understanding of the world. And it's not for us to say how religious people might make those two things match up, but a lot of them can and do, and recognize that science is very important and also have their faith. Of course, that's not all religious people. And I think that is something that we need to challenge. If people don't believe, think things like young earth creationists, thankfully quite uncommon in this country, more common in places like America. But I think that if the focus is on a wide range of subjects, and like I said before, like critical thinking, thinking for yourself, and what science can do, why is science important, teaching everybody like why what they're learning is important, then I think that's a really good thing. And then the religious freedom side, if children when they get older want to believe in religion, then that is their choice, but then they weren't encouraged that way or forced into it through an education system. And I think the things I think we might have talked before in this podcast, in terms of things like freedom of religion and belief. I, as a humanist, believe in absolute freedom of religion until it gets into harming people. And if those beliefs or actions that they lead to are harmful, then that's when that ends. And if somebody believes in a religious understanding of the world that's anti-science and harmful, then that's the sort of thing that we really need to make sure we're clamping down on.
Yeah, and Mark, from your point of view, what do you see in terms of the role of the school versus, I guess, the parents, and who should decide what type of education a child is getting?
Yeah, I mean, these sorts of issues play into that wider debate, don't they, about faith schools? I suppose these are faith schools plus, in a way, but the same general issues, I think, apply in terms of, obviously many faith schools don't really pose so much of a problem in terms of having a more sort of fundamentalist approach and objecting to the teaching of science, etc., as Nicole was indicating. But there are still issues around aspects of this, and we've seen examples of state-funded schools, which inadequately teach science, particularly around evolution and possibly also cosmology and origins. So I think my own feeling is that it's the right of the individual rather than their parents, which is paramount here, and that every child should have access to a balanced education based on scientific principles. I think parents have the opportunity to create a religious environment in the home. They can teach the values they wish there. I think that's some people would question that, but that seems to me like a fair balance. And then in schools, I feel, should be essentially secular, or if there is religion there, it should be tempered. I'm personally not in favour of faith schools, to put my cards on the table, but that would be an issue for a democratic debate and discussion. So I think I think a child has a right to have that education, and then they can make a decision themselves, an informed decision at a later stage. As somebody once said, there's no child is born. There's no such thing as in one view as a Christian child or a Muslim child. They're just children, and they will make up their minds in the same way that there aren't sort of Labour or Tory children. That's something they will decide at an appropriate juncture.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's something that I've certainly experienced. So I only went to state schools, but my mum is Christian and my dad's Jewish. They decided to tell me about the religions and what all the religions, both the religions did and how they did. But then they didn't say, you are this. They were like, Dad was like, I'm Jewish and your mum's this. But you can decide when you're older. And I think that was so great. I'm really grateful to them for that, because I came to my own decision. And obviously I'm a humanist, and my sister went down quite a religious path, but of a different religion. But what I realized that it's what we both chose to do. It wasn't that we were just told, you are this, so you will be this. And I think that it just gives you more freedom to act. If it's thinking for yourself, again, it's that whole thing with anything. And I feel really sorry for children who feel forced into saying, I'm a whatever, when, like you said, Mark, they're not. They're just, it's their parents have told them they are, and they kind of have to be for now.
I think that point about the comparison with teaching politics in school as well, I think is a really good one, because I think if you had different schools that you could send your children to depending on their political ideology, I think everybody would view that as quite strange and divisive within society, that you were going to be, if you had a politics teacher who was only going to teach you that one particular school of thought was correct, then I don't think anybody would support that. So I think that's an interesting comparison to make. It is very odd that it still exists within society that you would divide children like this from an early age and not have them mingle and learn and have the advantages of those mixed influences that Nicole was talking about there.
Yeah, just to quickly come in on that, I went to a really lovely choral event which was held in a church the other day, and it was predominantly, well, it wasn't all actually religious choral music, but the choir was not an affiliate to the church. But somebody said, these events count when you're trying to get your children into a C of E school, because there's a certain number of events you have to attend in order to demonstrate that you're. And it seems to me, here's an example flipping things round the other way, where people are being pressured to attend religious schools and not just send their children. Well, they want to get their children to certain schools which are good, which happen to be church schools, and in order to do so, they have to comply with a certain level of attendance at religious events. So, the idea of sort of freedom of choice in the educational arena and in terms of one's faith, it doesn't seem to be particularly being respected on the other side of the coin.
Absolutely, and this I think this also perpetuates this idea as well that the particularly state faith schools tend to be the higher performing ones. So parents then compete to get their kids into those ones, and then they tend to be higher performing, and that cycle continues, and that's seen in some circles as evidence that they're better schools, or that it's a better having faith as part of the education, or mandatory worship in the morning is better for children. But as you say, it tends to be that they just have historically been the better funded schools, and so that cycle continues. Before we close out on this topic, the article specifically focuses on science and the level of science education that children are getting. Nicole, why is science literacy so important, particularly in society?
Yeah, I think it's massively important. I think things like the pandemic have really shone a light on how science illiterate the general population is. And not helped by things like social media and Facebook, where misinformation or fudging of things or outright lies were allowed to propagate because people aren't applying any critical thinking or science literacy to what they're reading. I think that there's the quite extreme example where people believe something because of a Facebook post that doesn't even pretend to be. They're just like, oh, it's just a Facebook post that says something like there's microchips in the vaccine, and someone believing that. I think that's quite obvious what's wrong with that. But then there's the kind of more subtle things where people might use the language of people who are interested in truth, or use, I think it's called scientism, when you kind of use what looks like, like evidence-based, these are cold hard facts, here's the numbers. But for a multitude of reasons, those aren't actually, that's not the thing that you should actually get from it, whether it's intentional or not. And for us humanists, obviously, we understand that science is just observation. I think that I've definitely heard some religious people talking about the idea that science is a dogmatic system, but of course it isn't. It's always changing. It's not one thing, but science is the best we can get to truth. And I think understanding that, and that we can change our minds, we can be pro-science, have 100% scientific thing, but we can be like, oh, we've either found this new information that shows this now, so what we previously said was wrong. That happens all the time in science, and it doesn't mean that it was necessarily wrong, but it's to update it. So it's looking at things with a critical eye. And again, it's all education. I think one really basic concept that humanists like talking about is something like correlation and causation. So the fact, and it is a fact, that the more damage a fire costs, the more firefighters appear. And then, of course, you can frame that like, oh, it's because there's more firefighters, there's more damage at this fire made. But obviously the truth is the fire was bigger, so more firefighters had to come to turn it off. And it's just like, you can frame what is an actual fact in a different way and get a different understanding of it. And I think even just simple things like that, if more people understood that this equals this is not always true, I think we'd have a much better society, much more open and honest, and people wouldn't be sucked into misinformation as quickly.
Yeah, I think we sort of talk about scientific subjects, and we tend to have particular ones in mind. But of course, the scientific method, the sort of the rational inquiry, the use of evidence, it permeates all the subjects, really. Even literary criticism, or maybe some certain exceptions. But obviously, in terms of the way you're marked, it's always based on some sort of scientific principle. So I think it's something which is it's central to the way in which our educational systems work, that opposition to that essentially signifies that you're denying sort of any form of rationality. You're essentially embracing a purely dogmatic approach based on sort of revelation, or just somebody else feels, ancient texts, or whatever it is. And that is, so in a sense, it's emblematic of a rejection of the very most fundamental principles upon which we base education, public policy, the law. I mean, going to a law court, you don't expect somebody to sort of go into a trance and then decide what the outcome is. So so I think in a sense it's a very general thing in terms of the specific around what maybe a slightly narrower interpretation of science. I mean, it's something which it's been around for a very long time, but the development of that methodology has been essentially central to the advances that human society have made, and as Nicole says, it's the best method we've got for understanding the truth. So what's not to like, really? So yeah, I can't see any justification for not embracing that. And if people can't subject their ideas to the rigors of that type of rational interrogation, then I would suggest they've probably got something to hide. They're not very confident in their ideas. So yeah, I think it's central.
I think people like us who are explicit humanists kind of love doing this reason and rationality. Like, why do I think everything? And of course, not everyone has to do that, but it's just a basic understanding of what is science. I was having a debate with somebody once who believes in a lot of spiritual things. And they said, enduring it, they were like, this is outside science. And then I was like, do you know what science is? It's just observation. And they were like, oh, yeah. So I was like, so if it exists in the world, it either can be seen with scientific methods, or it doesn't exist. And it's just kind of amazing that the idea that like, oh, science is this one bubble, and then there's other things. It's like, no, science it's not like some magical system. It's just a human construct of how we can get to truth. It kind of goes back to the pandemic, like I was saying, is in medicine, and applying kind of scientific rigor to our own beliefs about medicine. So with alternative therapies, they range from everything like this herb will cure your cold, which is kind of harmless, even if it's not true, to you don't need cancer treatment because here's this herb, which is not true. And I think that, again, if people were more confident in looking to research and sometimes these, because alternative therapies really are either things that have been debunked by science or ones that they haven't researched. And sometimes people, before we had such good medicine, did stumble across things that were correct, even if they didn't really understand why. One good example I always think of is acupuncture. Traditional acupuncture claims to work on a system of kind of energy flow and redirecting energy flow, which I think us as humanists don't believe in because there's no evidence for it. However, when they've done clinical trials, it does help with certain muscular issues. So I think it's like we can, whereas somebody like me, I think would have always been like, oh, acupuncture is obviously bullshit. But yeah, it's like, and then reassessing that, because even something I would have debunked was like, oh, actually it does have these ways you can apply it, just not the ones that the traditionalists would say.
I think that's a great point, by the way. And I've benefited from acupuncture myself, but I don't really believe in in the energy flows. Just going back to the point we made at the beginning around science as well, in particular, obviously, there is a particular emphasis, isn't there, on those sorts of skills as being really useful in the labour market for people. So as well as, being a fantastic way of understanding the world. And so from that slightly more prosaic but important aspect, if these people are not receiving a scientific education, they are going to be heavily disadvantaged in their future lives in terms of getting a good job. And, that's a tragedy for them, as well, as we discussed earlier, in terms of the sort of feeding into skills shortages.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, that healthcare is often the area where there is the most controversy around application, and listening to experts as has become controversial now. And I do always find it funny when someone says that they don't like to listen to traditional experts in areas like healthcare or science, to ask them, particularly if they work in a highly skilled job, say they're a car mechanic, whether, we should listen to a car mechanic, or we should just ask someone who's completely unqualified and deals in alternative engineering, how best to fix their car. Same when it comes to, who would you rather be flying a plane? Someone who's had 7 years of training, or someone who's read a Facebook post about the best way to do it. But it's interesting how, and possibly because our health is so personal, so fragile, and can obviously be scary, that seems to be the area that does have the most controversies around listening to the science. And potentially because medicine is a very slow-moving and imperfect science, because of the risks that are involved. It's not as accurate as things like engineering, where you can make mistakes, and the eventual solutions can be quite much more precise. When you're dealing with people, I think there's a large sample size, and lots of things can go wrong that we try to avoid. So I guess I wonder if that's a reason why people are more open to subscribing to non-scientific thinking, or not wanting to necessarily trust the science, because when there are mistakes, they are much more devastating, I suppose, and can really have an impact over generations if someone decides they don't trust medicine, or they don't trust the health system. Yeah, and I guess that also leads back to just having more respect in general for science, or critical thinking within society. I mean, Mark, you kicked off talking about politics being very polarized, and it does seem as though now, even scientific topics, things like climate change, have become more based on loyalty and what you believe politically, rather than actually following the science. And I think, going back to the point Nicole made, being willing to change your mind when the facts change as well. So do you think this is something that we need to consider as a lifelong learning as well? Mark, do you have any thoughts on that, in terms of, should we continue to have scientific education or learning about critical thinking?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, because I've got a bit of a hobby horse. So I suggested this an idea to, I'm sure it's not an original idea, to a friend who actually works in science education. He's an editor of a children's science magazine, but he didn't seem that enthusiastic. But essentially, I think we should have the term that Nicole's used, science literacy. I think we should have an actual science literacy program, with the sort of stages of science literacy that anybody could be able to take in order to be able to, beyond, above and beyond, or parallel to, actually getting GCSEs and A-levels, etc., in scientific subjects, just a more general science literacy test, just in order to sort of promote the idea that science literacy is a good thing, and also to sort of gauge it so people could test for themselves where they are. I'd be fascinated to see my own scores, and I just think it would be something we should just be pushing all the time, and particularly amongst those in decision-making roles. So whether they are politicians, civil servants, judges, teachers in general, teachers, not science teachers, because I think we should be promoting science literacy throughout society. And I think, for all the reasons Nicole has been talking about, it's really important in so many ways. And I'd really like to see that pushed a lot further.
A lot of what the scientific method is about is removing the individual bias all humans that are involved, which can include the science teacher themselves. So the more different sources you are referring to, and the more times you come back to testing your assumptions, that you are, getting a wider range of inputs and potentially removing any bias, because science teachers themselves may well be dismissive of, let's say, acupuncture, like you mentioned, Nicole, because I think that's something that's been quite controversial in the past. So, yeah, it does need to be revisited, and indeed, the facts or the best thinking on many topics will change over time. Is there any other practices you would like to see included, Nicole? Things that we can consider when we're thinking about improving science literacy in society?
Yeah, it's difficult to how to engage people outside of an education system. So because in theory, if you give children and students the right tools, that can be something. They don't need to be taught anything else about it. It's like, here's how to be critical, here's how to look at sources, here's how to think about bias, all these sorts of things. Then in theory, that the kind of fundamentals shouldn't need to be taught again. But I think we all can accidentally, even those of us who really try and be rigorous and try to find the closest to truth, we find that there's certain things we can just assume. And I think that's something that kind of a yearly reminder, maybe this could go back to our national holiday, a yearly reminder to be like, you might have some things that you've just assumed are true, but based on nothing, and you've never really looked into it. And are you correct? I think that's it, like always being aware, and that we're infallible, we're humans, we're not science robots, that we are, but as long as we're trying, then that is kind of the best we can do.
Education doesn't stop at school, as we know, and our guest this week has actually taken their humanism through to implementing it into their student life as well at university. So here's my interview with Ojas Singh Bhanot, who is the founder of Humanist Open Minds, which is a students' union group from the London School of Economics. Ojas Singh Bhanot is a politics and data science student at the London School of Economics, where he's also the founder of the LSE Students' Union Humanist Open Minds group. His role involves leading a platform and promoting humanist values within the university community, focusing on open dialogue and inclusivity. Ojas, thank you so much for joining us on Humanism Now.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure's all ours. So I think you're the first student representative that we've had featured on the podcast. So firstly, thank you for everything you've done. Would love to hear more about the group that you've created. So I guess to introduce to our listeners, could you give us a brief introduction to yourself and why you chose to set up the LSE SU Humanist Open Minds group? What was the motivation behind establishing this student group?
So, as you already mentioned, I'm a student of politics and data science, now in my second year at LSE. And Humanist Open Minds, as it says on the website, is a community dedicated to humanism and free thought, and the appreciation of human potential and reason. The aim is not just to bring together the non-religious, but also to engage in dialogue with religion and promote an exchange of ideas. As for my motivation, I have been non-religious for quite a while, and before I came to LSE, I saw that there are societies representing all the major faiths around the world, but there is no atheist or humanist presence. So I had this in mind even before beginning my studies, that I want to go there and start some sort of humanist society. And I went through with this in April 2023.
Congratulations. And I know you've also built a very strong team around you that is running and taking the group forward. So did you face any initial challenges in setting up Humanist Open Minds, and how did you and your team address those?
So at the initial stage, the challenge was to first find people for the core committee to run society, which I did. I put together this really beautiful team we have here. And then, according to the student union's rules, we have to collect 20 people's signatures who are interested in the society to set it up. So I did find some like-minded people, including many friends of mine. Afterwards, the challenge was more to get the word out and promote the society, to let people know that we exist and we're out there. So we have been doing this using social media and word of mouth, as well as we've got some help from the Students' Union. They're very helpful. They promote societies and their events as well.
And I wonder, when you were collecting those signatures, did you find that most students had a accurate understanding of humanism, or was there some misconceptions that you had to deal with in explaining what this group would be about and what you would aim to achieve?
Well, from my experience, I found that people did have some reservations. They hesitated to even put their signatures down, for even express their interest in a group which is non-religious. But then as I discussed with them what humanism is about, they became more comfortable with the idea, and I feel that helped a lot for people to understand what humanism is actually.
Individuals can be quite concerned by labels. Rightfully, I think it's good to be apprehensive of labels straight away. But once you do engage and we're able to explain what humanism is about, and what the core tenets are, the main belief system, most people kind of realize that that's something that they would be happy to affiliate with. But yes, congratulations on working through that to get the group up and running. So could you talk us through some of the key activities and the main initiatives that you've undertaken to promote humanism, both through the Open Minds group and more broadly at LSE?
So at our society, our signature event is Dialogue Over Donuts. So these are regular informal discussions on topics relating to religion. And we invite people from many faiths to come. A lot of people do come, bring their unique and different perspectives. And we have very interesting conversations between religion and non-religion. We also collaborate with other societies and organizations, sometimes even put on social events that are just pure fun. We want to make it inclusive for everybody to join regardless of their faiths. I personally, beyond the society, engage in a lot of other events and with other religious societies. I've had a lot of beautiful discussions with the Christian Society, for instance, at our university.
Yeah, I think that engagement, interfaith involvement and engagement is crucial as well for, again, the explanation and the broad acceptance of the term. So congratulations and well done for your efforts in building the awareness and acknowledgement of humanism on campus. What advice would you give to fellow students or perhaps future students who might be considering starting a similar humanist group at their university or on campus?
Well, for any students looking to start a humanist society or a similar group at their university, first of all, I would really want to encourage and support you. It's a really great idea. Do go for it. And I have 3 suggestions to keep in mind. The first would be to present the group as inclusive and welcoming of all. Even something as small as calling the group an atheist society versus a humanist, open minds kind of group changes the appeal a lot. Because as we were discussing, people are hesitant to identify with labels associated with strong non-religion. But humanist is something people can actually relate to. The second point would be to engage with other faith societies, and if there is a faith center at university, do definitely reach out to them, collaborate with them. At LSE, they have been really, really helpful, and there is a lot of scope for joint events as well. The third thing is do not get into any controversy or offend anybody unnecessarily. Such an incident has happened at LSE in the past, and it gets you nowhere. It damages the reputation of the group, and it doesn't really help at any point. There's no point doing such a thing.
Was that an external speaker when there was more of an offence or controversy caused?
I think back in 2013, and it was the previous Atheist and Humanist Society at LSE, ASH, and it was something to do with the Welcome Fair.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we've had a lot of talks recently and guests on the podcast discussing dialogue, and politeness and respect goes a long way if you want to change someone's mind. And I think one of the key things, first of all, is building rapport and setting boundaries and respectful dialogue. So yes, I really do appreciate your approach. And you mentioned, of course, that if anybody would like to start a similar group, then you would be happy to help. How can anyone, or what is the best way to get in touch with you if somebody would like to ask any questions or request some support?
Well, I would be happy to help anybody who is considering a similar group. So the best way to reach out would probably be by email, and then I'll be happy to meet in person as well later on.
Fantastic. And we will share some links to Ojas's socials on in the show notes if you would like to follow up and contact him. So I'm interested to take a little bit of a step back. You mentioned you're a student of politics and data science. That's quite an interesting mix, but probably one that's becoming more and more important in society, particularly with the rise of data and AI in more and more, not just in the creative, but in decision-making and business processes. And I imagine it's being incorporated into politics as well. I'd be interested to get your views on the rise of AI, or particularly your studies in data science, and how that can be used as a positive for humanism. And I guess similarly, where do you see the potential risks to humanist values?
Well, at our degree, we have been studying a lot of courses around ethics and political impacts, societal impacts of AI. And I feel that, well, personally, I find the concern a bit overblown because AI also provides us with, or might in the future provide us with the potential to advance human values, to create a better world for everybody, which is what humanism also strives for. And mindful of the concerns that are around AI, I feel that we should definitely treat this as a good opportunity to advance stuff that humanism believes in and create a better world for all.
Yeah, I see this topic of data ethics becoming one of the key areas of research going forward. It must be fascinating to be, studying it, particularly at this time. Is there any resources or areas you would point to if anybody wanted to get a really good, thorough understanding of data ethics? Anything you would recommend?
Well, one of my favorites is the Oxford Handbook of Digital Ethics. It has a wide range of chapters covering all facets of not just AI and data, but all digital technology in general. And I find it a really interesting book to read in my spare time. It's a great resource to go to for this.
Fantastic. We will certainly link to that as well. So, with all that going on, how do you balance your academic responsibilities with running a student group like Humanist Open Minds? I was involved in a couple of student groups many years ago, and it's very time consuming. So to be a founder and to champion it, as well as doing such a intensive course, how do you find balancing those two responsibilities?
Well, I find that so far I have been able to balance them quite well, and I'm getting decently good grades as well. So it depends on how much effort you invest into what you're doing, and ultimately it comes down to good time management, which is something that every student learns at some point, but I feel I have been quite good at it as well right now. So it's going quite well with both. I'm able to balance them quite well.
Excellent. And remind me, how many years off graduation are you at the moment?
I'm in my second year, so I will graduate next year in July.
Fantastic. So I guess you'll be looking for new joiners to join the committee and take on the running of the group going forward.
For sure.
And with that, and reflecting on your time both at LSE and with Humanist Open Minds, what impact do you feel the group has had on the community, and what would you like to see from the next generation of leaders to take the group forward?
Well, if I look back, we have managed to successfully revive the humanist presence at LSE after a gap of almost 8 years. So we've created representation for humanism and non-religion, and even the religious people and religious societies are becoming aware of humanism, which also increases the mutual respect we were talking about earlier. And going forward for the next future leaders of the society, what I would want to see is a more broad reach, because we have found that a very, very large number of young people are non-religious, but they also quite hesitate to identify with that label and everything. So to broaden the scope and membership of the society, make it bigger, that's what I would want to see in the future.
You touch on such an important point, and I think this is also a key issue for lots of local groups, which we work out with Central London Humanists, and there's a great network of local groups across the UK. And I think a common challenge is how do we engage more younger people, because certainly we see that correlation that the younger generations are less likely to identify with a religious group or religious identity. But they're not. They're not. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to join us in championing humanist causes or join humanist groups. So, what suggestions or recommendations would you have for any local group like ours, or any of our? We have an international listenership here, for how we can engage more young people and help them to feel comfortable identifying with the humanist label, given that they probably already share the values that we have?
Well, I think the single most important thing would be for people to actually be aware of what humanism is about. It's not just about rejecting religion or being non-religious. There are other values. It's about human goodness, appreciating reason, potential, all of these things. And I find that people have initial reservations about humanism when I talk to them about it. But when I explain to them what humanism actually is about, a lot of people find themselves relating to it even more and more. including many religious people as well. So what I feel the most important thing is for people to know what humanism is about, to spread that awareness first. And once that has happened, I feel people will engage more with humanist causes and groups.
And I imagine those campus engagements, particularly Freshers' Weeks and just engaging people in conversation and dialogue is a great way to do that. So again, thank you for everything you've done, and really looking forward to see what comes of Humanist Open Minds and for your own career post university. So reflecting on your time, well, I guess looking ahead more, what are your plans post graduation? And do you intend to continue your community engagement work and community building?
Well, looking beyond university, I do want to stay engaged with the cause of humanism, and so I do intend to get involved in local groups, depending on where in the world I am at that point. And I'm also penning down some of my ideas on humanism and religion, maybe for some blog posts or some longer text. Let's see what comes out of that.
Fantastic. Well, do share those with us when that gets launched, and we do wish you the best with your future endeavours, whatever you choose to do post university. And again, congratulations on creating Humanist Open Minds. Finally, our standard question for all of our guests here: what's something that you've changed your mind on recently?
Well, I have come to appreciate many things recently that I did not earlier. Mushy peas, for instance. But more for the topic at hand.
Did you visit the north?
Mm-hmm. I did. But more for the topic at hand, I appreciate the need to engage with religion and understand what and why people believe, rather than just dismiss it or discount it. For the past year, I was avoiding all of the faith societies and the faith center at university because I thought this is not for me. But now I am myself getting involved. I'm reading religious scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Bible. And even if I disagree, it allows me to make a principled and well-grounded point, and also to be correct and pay due respect to people's beliefs.
I think that's so important. And yeah, I mean, has it changed? I guess when you mention having a deeper understanding for why people believe, could you draw that out for us a little? What do you think you've realized through both studying the scriptures, but also engaging people in dialogue?
Well, I see for a lot of people, religion is not just about the rituals or the scriptures. It's about a lived experience. And it is that lived experience which I seek to understand by engaging with religion as well. Because, well, while I try to stay out of it, I can only have an outsider's perspective. But I feel only when you truly understand the other side can you make your own point well.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and engaging and developing that deeper understanding is only going to help strengthen our reason and our cause as well. So, Ojas Singh Bhanot, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Congratulations with the Humanist Open Minds, and all the best of luck for the remainder of your studies and whatever you choose to do next.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to Humanism Now, and thank you very much to Ojas for that insightful interview and for everything he's doing with the Humanist Open Minds group. So Nicole and Mark have had a chance to listen to the interview as well. So I wondered, Mark, what was most interesting to you about Ojas's approach and everything he's been doing at LSE?
Yeah, I thought he came across extremely well. He's obviously a very intelligent person, very committed to a good cause, and that is of spreading an understanding of humanism. So I thought what particularly interested me about that was that the type of approach he'd adopted, and the context being that they'd had a previous attempt, maybe more than one, but certainly the last attempt to launch and sustain a humanist group in the university union had been, I think, 8 years previously, something like that, and had sort of run out of steam, which, as we know, is something that happens quite a lot. And I think he'd learned a certain lesson from that the previous iteration had been somewhat mired in some sort of controversy. We didn't go into too much detail about that, but there was a sense that it had been maybe it had taken quite well. To frame it another way, he was concerned about taking a too adversarial approach. So I thought it was really interesting that he was much more interested in focusing on interfaith dialogue, working with other groups, maybe also trying to have sort of fun social events, which didn't have anything to do with the actual sort of a serious examination of topics. I'm sure they do events which are more like ours, where we have sort of discussions about humanist themes, etc. But it seemed to be that he was adopting a very, I suppose, collaborative and non-confrontational approach, which was quite interesting, because obviously that's something which, as humanists, we know comes up quite a lot, that some people are very uncomfortable with taking sort of what they see as a sort of robust and critical attitude towards religion. They prefer something which is a little bit more sensitive and empathetic, and he's very much seems to have leaned into that approach, which was interesting. I don't know whether that's a sign of the times or whether it's something specific to his understanding, because he was saying how he'd had these very rich experiences of sort of engaging with people of faith and discussing their ideas, and I think finding some common ground without in any way losing his humanist beliefs. So I thought that was, it sounds like a very interesting and positive approach, possibly one also that requires quite a high level of time commitment and I don't want to say intelligence, but certainly a very empathetic personality. So there was a lot in there that was very rich and interesting.
Yes, his approach reminded me a lot of my interview with Jeremy Riddell, I think, on the dialogue side of things, and he clearly sees the role of the humanists as being part of a much wider group and integrated with the rest of the faith groups in the university. Nicole is one of our representatives from Young Humanists UK. What can we take and look to replicate, both in terms of Ojas and his approach within the Students' Union, but also creating that pathway for recent graduates to get more involved in other local groups?
The transition can be quite hard, and I think that is a moment when a lot of people kind of fall off humanist activism, let's call it. Partly, and I mean, a big thing, and it's something we find in Young Humanists, is that after university, a lot of people, they're putting themselves headfirst in their careers, and in early careers, you have to work quite hard to get into certain things, or things like having families and things like that. So kind of life gets in the way, for lack of a better word, I think, for lots of people, because when you're in uni, you do have a lot of time to dedicate to those sorts of interest things. So, but I think if you have the external influence, then that's easier to stay into. So, for example, joining the local humanist group. And I think for local humanist groups, making sure you've got that connection, if there is a humanist student group, to be like, hey, and maybe do some events together, so that they're not just turning up to a bunch of strangers. They've already known them through the student one, and keeping those connections. It's interesting that Ojas talked about both the failed group before, because I think it's a two-sided thing, that partly it's what kind of events, what do people want out of a humanist group, understanding that, but it's also the waves of atheism, humanism. There was a big wave I've heard of, so it wasn't around in the 1970s, based on I'm not actually sure why that was, but a big wave in kind of atheist humanist understanding, especially in student groups. And then there was a big wave when I was at university, and that was because it was the generation of people who grew up reading The God Delusion, which was its own flavour of atheism. And like you touched on, Mark, and Ojas said, it's like that kind of combative, cold rationalist way that I think has kind of fallen out of favour. And so the kind of this new batch of student groups that are hopefully emerging now will have that more kind of interfaith dialogue, all this sort of the nice elements, rather than being really brutal.
Yeah, increasingly groups, I think, are looking to reflect humanists in terms of what we stand for, rather than what we're not or what we stand against, which I think, as you say, was that last wave, particularly around the new atheists, was very much a backlash against religion, or a particularly extreme religion. Whereas now I think people are much more engaged with creating a society and a community and standing up for what we do believe in. And Ojas, it's great to see Ojas and other local groups, and the Young Humanists, of course, who are leading the way for the next generation and having these more collaborative conversations.
I think it's really an interesting point around not just the tenor or the flavour of contemporary humanism as being maybe less adversarial and maybe a bit less macho. That also this ties in with something else that I just mentioned, which is around a lot of people not understanding what humanism is or having a misconception about what it is. And he said how people were often suspicious at first. He was surprised how wary they were when he sort of introduced the subject. When he explained to them what it was, they felt much more reassured and people began to engage. And I think it's that sense, that sort of dual sense, based on what Nicole's saying about how, yes, it's not understanding humanism and not necessarily, it's a thing in and of itself. It's not just a critique or an aggressive critique of religion, which puts a lot of people off, but also then, going on to say this is what it is, because a lot of people just don't know, they may not even know anything at all about it, and it's a complete revelation to them. And we find that all the time, don't we, with what we do, which is why we're making efforts to try to sort of, as a group, Central London Humanists, to help explain to people, provide opportunities for people to learn about what humanism is, which is a pretty foundational entry-level type of humanism, but it's really important, and universities are a perfect place to do that.
More news on how we will be educating people about humanism very soon, Mark, I'm sure. But I think you're right. The universities is probably the best place where to educate, but also, capture people while they're open to new ideas and see if it's something that resonates with them. But yeah, definitely this re-education of what humanism is, explaining it to people and seeing if more people feel like that's something that they can get on board with, or what they already believe, is a wonderful initiative. So once again, thank you to Ojas, everything he's doing, and best of luck for him and the team at Humanist Open Minds, and hopefully the new students who'll be taking that forward in the future. So before we close out this week, we just have our regular feature to ask one of our panel if there is something which they have changed their mind on recently. And this week, Nicole, I'm going to put you on the spot to ask you if there's anything which you've changed your mind on.
Yes, so I have changed my mind on something very recently, just this week, and it also feeds in very well to what we've been talking about science literacy. So I'm sure we've all heard that turmeric and the active component in it, curcumin, is really, really good for you. And there's all these purported benefits. But that is now up in the air, at least for me. It's not bad for you, of course. It is just a spice. So at least there's that. That's not up for debate. But basically, one of the lead researchers into this is an American biochemist. He's called Bharat B. Agarwal. And he was interested in curcumin because his background, he is a proper medical doctor, but he was interested in looking at Ayurveda, which is very obsessed with turmeric. And he authored more than 120 articles about the compound of curcumin. And he was all these really quite grand things. He was like, it might have implications for cancer, Alzheimer's, it wasn't just general immune system. And he recommended taking a 500 milligram curcumin supplement for daily health. But as it's turned out, he has probably been paid off for that. He's big sponsorships with supplement companies, particularly those making curcumin supplements. And a cancer centre launched a research fraud probe against him. And 30 of his articles were retracted, which is one of the highest amounts of scientific articles being retracted by a single person, I think, ever. And then looking into a lot of the research, a lot of it was failed ethics about how many tumours they were injecting into mice and things like this. And lots of things like technically the active elements are there, but how do they cross kind of the blood-brain barrier? How do they get absorbed? So basically there's lots of, and I think that the consensus among people casually is like, it's great for you, turmeric. But now I'm not so sure that it is actually the miracle spice that people once thought.
Yeah, thank you for that public service announcement as well. And I think it brings us full circle to our conversation in part one as well. And this is, I guess, why there are, or these scandals are often why people do have, serious doubts and mistrust of scientists, because when there is a scandal like this, and it does happen from time to time, that papers have to be retracted, or that it turns out that someone has acted fraudulently, it's incredibly damaging to the sector as a whole. So that's fascinating. And it does seem as though it always seems to be any time there's a fad diet or something which is supposed to be the new cure, it never really lasts very long.
Well, strangely enough, I've recently started taking that as a supplement because it's supposed to be particularly good for the condition of chronic pain, which I do have, unfortunately. And it's interesting. About a year ago, I attended a conference about a scientific conference about chronic pain research, and probably similar to what you're just describing, it had an astonishingly high, sort of above average level of scientific fraud, or just papers that had to be withdrawn, or which were shown on analysis to be inadequate in terms of sample sizes and failing ethics and things like that. So it just shows that whilst the scientific principle is perfectly sound, there would always be those who, for various reasons, whether it's to get paid large amounts of money by vested interest or to advance their own careers, will be quite happy to undermine the integrity of that system, and something we always have to be wary of. And that is itself, isn't it, part of the scientific process?
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for sharing that, Nicole. And we will be requesting more, either listener or panel member, things they've changed their mind on. And as ever, if you would like to submit a question to our panel, please do get in touch. The email and form to get in touch with us for recommendations or questions is in the show notes. So that's everything we have time for this week on Humanism Now. Before we go, Mark and Nicole, just a quick plug for your groups and any events that you have coming up. No, Nicole, anything you'd like to flag with the Leicester Humanists or Young Humanists?
Yes, so Leicester Humanists have our first Humanist Assembly coming up, which we're very excited about. So that's going to be on Sunday, the 14th of April, at the Phoenix Cinema. Everybody's welcome, but you do have to register because we have a limited space. But we're really excited. I'm sure people have heard about the kind of Sunday Assembly movement. And that's the kind of thing we're going for, an exciting humanist gathering with lots of thoughts and ideas. And yeah, it should be really good.
Yeah, we'll have to have a session on the Sunday Assembly and present that on the podcast a little bit, and the different feelings there are towards that style of atheist group. So yeah, best of luck with that. We will include links in the show notes. And Mark, thanks once again for joining us. Anything you'd like to mention from the Central London Humanists?
Yes, so I'm very much involved with James's support and the support of others in running our discussion group, and we're having a bit of a tie-in with the book group where they're going to be talking about, is it Robert Sapolsky's book Determined, I think it's called, a slightly longer title, but that's the headline word, and that will be, forgive me, but it's the second Thursday in April. I can't actually remember what the date is, but you'll find it on Meetup with all our other events when it's posted up.
Yes, I think there's some quite strong views within the group around free will, as there is, I think, across any group. That's one topic, controversial topic, that I don't think is aligned with other beliefs. So you tend to get lots of interesting views from that. So that should be a really interesting discussion and debate amongst humanists. And finally, I'd just like to mention that our next in-person event with the Central London group will be our open mic poetry night, which will be on the 15th of May at our regular venue, the Old Diorama Arts Centre in Central London. It's hosted by Alex Williams, who has been a guest on the podcast previously and is well known as a fantastic poet and event host here in London. And it's going to be in tribute to the great Benjamin Zephaniah as well. So if you would be interested to perform or just come along and support us, we will be live in London on the 15th of May from 6 p.m. So with that, I'd just like to thank Mark and Nicole for their time. Thank you, listener, for joining us. Please do rate and review. It helps more people find us and spread the positive word about humanism. And please do, if you would like to, support us on Patreon and follow us on all social media. And we look forward to seeing you next time.